I just can't take anymore. I'm tired. I'm burnt out. I just can't hurt anymore. And I really don't care. Sure, we live under the same roof, but that's it. The only thing that's between us are the children. Why don't you say something?
There's nothing to say. I agree.
I agree.
We should talk to the kids.
You don't understand. I can't do that right now. I can't take any more hurts.
I can't take the judging anymore.
I can't take the criticism.
I can't take the holier-than-thou attitude.
You haven't touched me in 6 months.
We can't even talk to each other without hurting each other.
I've tried.
I really have.
But no more.
No more.
No more.
I've got to get away. I've got to feel good about being me again.
Where will you go?
I don't know.
You could go to your sister's for a few days.
A few days? You really don't understand, do you? It's over.
To love and to cherish.
Till death do us part.
100 years ago, when the life expectancy was half what it is today, you didn't up and get a divorce. You stuck it out. But unfortunately, it's not that way today. 48% of marriages which begin at a flowerland altar will end up in a divorce court. This year, 1.8 million divorces will occur in the United States. That's 3.6 million people. They'll go into court armed with their charges and their attorneys and their affidavits and their counter charges, and they'll shoot it out until someone wins. But even the words of one who ought to know, even if you win, you lose. Even if you win, you lose. Now, those 3.8 million people are not bad people. They're hurting people. The insides of their stomach are raw and knotted. They never would have thought it was their marriage that would end up in a divorce court. Why, they had everything going for them, and the question keeps going over and over in their minds, why did this happen? Why is this happening to me? Some of us know, don't we? We've sat in those courts. We've heard those charges and the words. We're the walking wounded, the survivors, the alumni. But unfortunately, the simple truth of the whole thing is that divorce doesn't solve problems, it only changes them. There was once a lady in my life by the name of Jane. 3 days after she left, a friend of mine called and said, "Hey, come and spend some time with us. You need to get away." On Sunday, we naturally went to church, and guess what I heard?
Sometimes I wonder what's getting into people these days. I mean, a vow is a vow. My Bible says that if any man who divorces his wife and remarries another woman except for marital unfaithfulness, he commits adultery. Now, those aren't my words. Those are Jesus' words. And some of these people running off to the county courthouse to get a divorce need to hear that. It used to be a couple had a fight, she ran home to mama. Now she runs off to some shyster lawyer and says, "I can't live with him, I just can't live with him." Of course, nowadays, even dear old mama's probably getting a divorce.
Unfortunately, that's not an exaggeration. All too often, laity take their cues from the pulpit.
Oh, that was a wonderful sermon, Pastor. That really hit home.
It's just fine, as usual. It's a little long-winded, don't you think? And I'm worried to death about my pot roast. It must be burned to a crisp.
What do you want to ask over for dinner? Oh, there's the Jorgensens. I love his stories.
No, honey, I don't think so. I mean, after all, we had them over a couple of Sundays ago, and I think it's her turn. Besides, she's always complaining that my pot roast gets stuck up under her bridge.
There's the McMillans, and I can put up
Honey,
with them for a couple.
There's Janice Riley. Don't look. Don't look. Can you imagine? After 18 years.
Well, our marriage hasn't been any picnic.
Well, at least we took our marriage vows seriously. You know, I overheard Mary Hall say that she thought Janice ought to go to another church.
No.
Yes?
Well, maybe she's got a point. Well, she doesn't need to find a fellowship, someone she can talk.
Janice.
Janice, how are you?
Fine, how are
Good.
you?
Us, we're fine.
Oh, good. Listen, I was wondering if maybe you'd like to come over for dinner. I mean, I have a chicken in the oven, and
Today?
there's plenty.
Oh,
Yes.
sweet of you.
great.
We would have loved to, but,
Marge already has a pot roast in the oven.
well, Jim had already asked the Jorgensens, you see.
That's right.
Well, perhaps next week.
Next week.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
Great.
Oh, honey, there's the Jorgensens.
Oh, we'd better catch them.
Janice, we would like to let you know that, well, we're both praying for you in this time that must be so...
All right, I understand.
Well, we both certainly want to support you with our prayers.
Yes, we do.
Thank you.
We better
Well-
go, dear.
We'll see you tonight.
Bye.
I love your hat.
The walking wounded. She's just come from church and she's thinking to herself, I should have stayed at home. Somebody needs to catch those tears, but it's tough if you haven't been there. You see, the church should be the natural place to turn, but sometimes you don't find the help you need there. You see, we'd much rather come to the church at times of white lace and black tie than at times to mourn with those who mourn. Now, some would insist that the church deals much easier with those who've lost a mate through death rather than those who've lost a mate through the death of a relationship. If my wife Jane had died, my church would have sent flowers. They would have sent Hallmark cards. The ladies of the church would have bought casseroles to me. There would have been prayers from the pulpit and even statements in the church bulletin, but as a result, there was nothing. It was literally as if she had never existed. It would have been easier to have said goodbye to her in a funeral home than instead of inside a rustic little courthouse in the mountains of western North Carolina. The grief that I carried was harder because I carried it all alone. First, I wanted to deny everything. This isn't happening, not to me. Divorce, if it happens to somebody else. That's the first stage of divorce grief, denial. Some of us have been surprised. We had no idea. And we felt foolish because people come up and say, what do you mean you didn't know this was going on? Everybody knew about it. And maybe some of us suspected sooner or later, but we had no idea that later would come so soon. That's why a casual remark like, why didn't you work on your marriage, stings and wounds like shrapnel. It takes two to make a marriage work. Then comes the anger stage. How many times have you said, he made me so mad, or she aggravates the daylights out of me? Think about that for a moment. Who's the actor? What we ought to say is, I became so angry at him, but it's tough to admit anger. So we enter the bargaining stage.
Honey, please come home. I know we can work it out. I miss you so much, and I love you.
Somehow, we think there's a word, or words, or phrases, or promises, and if we can just discover them, we can get them to change their mind and come back home. And we fast, and we pray, and we read the Bible, and we believe, and it doesn't work. They don't come back home. So then we say things like,
I'll change. I really will.
I'll go for counseling.
I'll come home early.
I'll go to church.
I'll take some time off.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I really am. Only don't leave me. I'll do anything.
it's almost like the game show. Let's make a deal. But many have made up their minds before they left, and nothing we can say or do is going to change their mind. What we need is the fourth stage, acceptance. Yes, this is happening to me. Now, I don't know about you, but I had terrific problems getting used to the idea of being divorced. I'd say, I'm divorced, and run my hand across my mouth. And people would say, huh? And I go, I'm divorced, and run my hand out. I just couldn't say it. And then one day I said, I'm divorced, and someone said, oh. You see, I was always afraid that when I said that, someone was going to say, and I can certainly see why. But luckily, no one did. I was ashamed of being divorced, one of those kind of people. But there has to be a time when you face the music. God cannot help those people who won't face reality. But for those who can, there's that fifth stage, growth. I still haven't forgotten that fall night in 1975. Howard Johnson's, Vero Beach, Florida, sitting around a pool, noticing other couples. It had been a hard week, and I'd picked up a book that I'd seen advertised, Growing Through Divorce. That seemed contradictory. Growing through divorce? But as I read that night, there began to be this ray of hope within me that after the anger, after the denial, after the bitterness, after the acceptance, I could grow through this experience. I could grow through my divorce. And the author of that book, Jim Smoke, said either you go through divorce or you grow through it. It's your decision. And I've come to believe that we can go through any experience because the Lord will go through that experience with us. Now, I realize some of you are beginning to get a little uncomfortable with me at this point. It's so easy to reach for proof texts and say, my Bible says, well, what does the Bible say? It says, who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall trouble or hardship or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword? No! In all these things, we are more than conquerors through Him who loved us. My friends, it's time we stop wagging that finger at 3.6 million people going through divorce, because when we do, 3 fingers point back to us. It's so easy to be a Pharisee in this matter. And the only difference between a Pharisee today and in Jesus' day is that in Jesus' day they wore long robes. Today they wear permapress and aqua velva. Let me explain it this way. Suppose you were driving down the road, maybe a little too fast for the road conditions, and the unthinkable thing happens and smash, there's a terrific accident.
Hey there, buddy. How you feeling?
Not too well. I think I'm bleeding.
No, that's a shame. But there are a few things we need to chat about.
But officer,
Now,
I'm
as you can
hurt.
see, I have in my hand this year's edition of the State Driver's Manual. I'd like to draw your attention, if I may, to page 41, Section D, Article 11, Paragraph 3, Line 7. I'm sure you're familiar with this passage.
Oh, not really. I think I broke
Well,
something.
son, I'm sorry to hear that. But it says right here, and I quote, all citizens ought to observe the posted speed limits. Now, need I remind
But
you of
officer,
the
I'm
simple...
hardly in a position
now,
to
I
discuss...
certainly realize that. But I want you to understand that none of this unfortunate circumstance would have happened if you'd obeyed the law. Now, I'm not the type of person who's going to dwell on the wrongdoings of others, but the law does say 35 miles per hour. You did exceed the speed limit. Now, you have my sympathy, but you did break the law. And now you're reaping the consequences of what you've sown, and I got no choice but to issue you several citations. Number 1, speeding. Number 2, careless driving. Number 3, you got a broken headlight, and I don't like your attitude.
Well, we don't issue citations and read the driver's manual to people that are wounded in roadside accidents. What we do is get them to the nearest and best medical attention as soon as possible. Yet, for some reason, with the divorce, we take our time. And I suspect that's why some of you may be angry with the church at this point. Where was the church when I needed them? I can't answer that. I don't know. But I do know that God is always there, even when His church is elsewhere. You can go through this experience, or you can grow through it. And I believe I'm living proof that you can grow through it. When I wrote my first book, I wrote a poem called The Miracle. Let me read it to you. All my life I've believed in miracles. So those in the Bible were never a problem to accept. It was only natural that I thought one could happen in our lives. I thought some way you would change your mind and come back home to me. It's been several months, and now the months have become a year. The miracle I coveted has not come, but that doesn't change my belief one bit in the miracle giver, because He's given miracles to other couples in the last several months. There has to be material to make a fire, and the potter must have clay to turn his wheel. There has to be a match to light a candle. Now, though He wanted to give a miracle, the material through which He could work was just not available. What I must remember is that it hurt Him as much as it hurt me that there was no miracle. So He did what He could with what He had, and it was not second best. He gave me the peace of forgiveness and moments of joy and the promise of the future. I'm alive, I have hope, I have promise, I have faith. I'm not whispering, I'm shouting. I still believe in miracles. and I still believe in the miracle maker. Recovery requires a decision, not your ex's, but by you. Remember Jesus' words to the man at the pool of Bethesda, do you want to get well? That's the question I would ask you. Do you want to get well? When people get sick, we usually take them to a doctor, and sometimes we take them to a hospital. In fact, one of my friends has said that open heart surgery resembles the experience that he went through in divorce, only without anesthesia. Where do divorced people turn for help? Well, fortunately, all across this country, in large churches and small congregations, in great large urban areas and in tiny little hamlets, people are beginning to form support groups to help those going through this experience. And it's very biblical. What did Paul write the Corinthians? Praise be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the God of all comfort and the Father of all compassion, who comforts us in all of our troubles. We have a tendency to stop there and say, well, that sounds pretty good, but God doesn't heal us just so we stop pestering Him. He heals us, in the words of Paul, so that we can share the comfort we have received with others. Someone, somewhere, this moment is experiencing what you experienced yesterday. Now, there's nothing we can do about the past except mess up a perfectly good future reliving it. So let's turn our attention to how do we look forward the future and how do we strain to reach the future. Principle number 1, it's not so much what happens to me, it's how I choose to respond. That piece of advice given me a long time ago by a college president has really helped me. And it's helped me become a survivor. For the year I became divorced, 1,300,000 other divorces occurred. And yet some of those people are still in shambles today. They're martyrs. And a martyr would rather be recognized and decorated than helped. It's so easy to lay qualifiers and say, my pain is greater than your pain unless you went through what I've gone through. And a lot of people ask me, well, did you have children? And we didn't. They go, oh, well, it's much easier when you don't have children. But how do you know what I felt? How do you know what I feel when I see a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old and wonder what my child would have looked like? It's so easy to lay those qualifiers. So what if your divorce was the messiest in the whole world? Send in a report to the Guinness Book of Records. Hey, you're no martyr, you're no hero. You're a human being who's been hurt. Well, how are you responding to that hurt? If your ex still gets your goat, as they say down south, in 90% of the cases, it's because you allow your goat to be gotten. Hey, it's not so much what happens to you, it's how you respond to it. See if any of these sound familiar. Are you acting irresponsibly? Are you moody? Are you using money to dull the pain? Are you continuously rehashing the details of your divorce? Are you dating furiously? Are you plotting to get even? Are you relying upon drugs or upon alcohol? Are you jumping into a rebound marriage? If so, you're sabotaging your own future. When the Jews were in Babylonian captivity, their tormentors heard that they had a reputation as great singers. So they said, sing us one of the songs of Zion, to which the Jews responded, how can we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? That's what I ask. How do I sing the Lord's song in this strange land of divorce? Am I supposed to sing? Am I supposed to dance? Am I supposed to cry? Am I supposed to lay in the ashes? What am I supposed to do? Well, one thing's for certain. I can't get even, and I can't settle the score, but I can be a decider, and I can make a difference. Remember, it's not so much what happened to you, it's how you choose to respond. And the one way we can respond is by principle number 2, being good to yourself. Be good to yourself. It's amazing how many divorced people set out to finish what their ex only initiated, and that's emotional suicide. Hey, you're the only you've got, so you've got to take care of yourself. And one way to take care of yourself is don't pick at the scabs, ever. Did you ever get a scab right about here? Grade A, hardcore, number 3, and it won't budge. And we all know how to do the ballet of the scab. Da-da-dun, ooh, da-da, ooh, ah, da, ooh, ooh, oh. And finally there's just one little chunk there and it won't budge. A friend comes up and says, "You're too chicken to take that scab off." And you say, "Who, me? Watch this." And you know it's going to hurt, but you go, "Oh," and off, and it hurts so bad. Now today, none of you would do that because we're all very sophisticated single adults. In fact, some of you tell your children, "Don't pick at the scab." But it's so easy for me as a single adult to pick at scabs 3 miles down where no one can see. You see, the purpose of a scab is to bring healing. And remember, someone somewhere has it worse than I do. Principle number 3, be alert to the tyranny of the temporary. I've never met anyone who didn't like a rainbow. But rainbows only come after a storm. And sometimes the bigger the storm, the brighter the rainbow. Remember you when you were a little kid and maybe you got hurt. You went running into your mother and you said, "Mama, Mama, make it stop hurting now." A lot of us as divorced people do the same thing. And there are all kinds of things like drugs or alcohol or sex or even work. The temptation is to stay so busy you don't have any time to say, "Self, how are you doing today?" And sometimes in the wallop of the temporary, we make decisions that sabotage our future. And I know, believe me, I know what it is when those feelings sweep in on you, when you want someone to hold you, when you want someone to share a meal with, when you want someone to kiss it and make it go away. But in those times, what I may need is a mama rather than a mate. Principle number 4, I will give myself time to heal, no rebounds. I will give myself time to heal, no rebounds. Have you ever carved your initials in a tree and then you broke up the girl? What do? Chop down the tree? No, you've got to erase the bark, but you can't erase the bark, and neither can I erase the memories of Jane in my life. She is as much a part of me as is my left hand. And it's easy in those moments when the memories are really harassing me to leave no stone unturned looking for Prince Charming II or the new Sleeping Beauty. But you need time to heal. But we're so impatient. We want instant coffee and instant tea and instant pudding and instant relief. And how do some divorced people spell relief? They spell it a second marriage. But if you marry while you're still in the emergency room, you're going to be marrying a nurse. And what happens when you get out of the emergency room? What then? Now, I've experienced my shares of lonely birthdays and lonely 4th of Julys and those kind of Christmases that don't quite come together. But those are not a motivation for a second marriage. Nor is those spring days when it seems like everybody in the park is in love with someone, everybody except me. I need time to heal. And as an adult, that's a gift to me, time to heal. Now, some churches need to put in types of glass. They either put in these little windows of colored glass, or some will put in stained glass. But to save money, a lot of churches put in these colored panes of glass, yellow, light blue, light pink. And when you're standing outside the church, it looks very beautiful. Or on sunlit mornings when you're inside during church, it looks beautiful. And other churches, well, they like to put in these massive mosaics or stained glass windows, and you just simply have to admire craftsmanship like that. But sometimes a pane of glass gets broken. And they take a look at that pane of glass and they go, "Oh, there's nothing we can do with this pane of glass. We better throw it away." And sure enough, they do, and there's a terrific crash. And it breaks into 1,000 shreds. But along comes the master craftsman, and he bends into the trash can and he begins looking. Guess what he finds? A broken piece of glass. Where they threw it away, he sees a possibility. And he thinks, "I know just the place I can put it in that window." And sure enough, when he puts that piece of glass into the window, it becomes part of the whole. that incredible thing of beauty. What I'm trying to tell you is that the master craftsman can take your broken pieces and he can make something beautiful out of them, even when you can't. Trust him. He wants to do for you what he's done for so many others.
Man, if you could have seen me, I was a mess. Crying all the time. People didn't want to be around me. But I finally realized I would have to allow God to share my pain. When I hurt, he hurt. And slowly he's begun to take away the scars and rebuild my life.
You know, when my husband left me for another woman, boy, I thought my world had ended. I mean, there was no tomorrow. And I had really wanted children, too, but I said, well, that's that. But God came into my life, putting a stitch here and a stitch there. Slowly, I began to heal.
It's tough being a single parent. There are times when I wouldn't wish it on anyone. But we've come through this together. Christopher, me, and God.
What's the common factor in these people's lives? I think it's that they have allowed God to use the defeats as a sandpaper to bring out the grain in their life. And who knows today what he could do for you if you would give him a chance. Oh yeah, you want to know. What's the bottom line? Yeah, I do believe in second marriages. In Matthew's Gospel, when Jesus quoted those words about divorce, I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery. Oh, those words are as tough on us as they were on the people that heard him in Jesus' day. And the disciples responded, well, if that's the situation between a husband and wife, it's better not to marry. But notice how Jesus quickly responded, not everyone can accept this teaching, but only those to whom it has been given. I realize that this is an area of intense debate in the church today. So what's new? It had been debated for centuries before Jesus responded to it. It seems to me that what you tell me about divorce and remarriage is really what you think about God. And some people have this idea of God just hanging over the portals of glory, just waiting to take a swat at them. While others see God toiling over the accounting books, noticing everything we did and tallying it up, and we always come short with that type of God. So we've developed systems, the innocent versus the guilty party, implying that the innocent has a right to a divorce and a right to remarry. Well, a long time ago, I decided I didn't believe in that kind of system because it seems too convenient. It tempts me to say, well, this is what Jane did, and this is what Jane did, and this is what she did, and just go on, and it doesn't let me admit responsibility for my percentage of the blame for the divorce. Now, whether that's 1% or 51%, I must accept my fair share. That means getting honest with ourselves and honest with the Lord. But then he can bless. But he can't bless anyone who's always tattling on someone else. So I think there are some questions we need to ask before we consider a second marriage. Question number 1, have I forgiven my ex?
What do you mean, forgiven my ex? The dirty no-account lowlife. He tore my life into pieces. You know, if I could get my hands on him, I'd wring his neck till he looked like a slinky. Forgive? That's not up to me. That's up to God.
I have a feeling she has some problems in the area of forgiving her ex. But what about you? Have you forgiven your ex? Do you become just unglued even thinking about your ex? Can you even say your ex's name? Hey, it doesn't matter what they did. It matters what you do. In that familiar passage in the 19th chapter, it opens when Jesus had finished saying these things. What things? Well, we have to go back to the 18th chapter to find out what he had been talking about. And the 18th chapter, he was talking about the parable of the unmerciful servant. And remember Peter asked him, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother? 7? And the Lord said, no, I tell you 70 times 7. You need to forgive your ex. Until you do, the scar may heal on the surface, but inside, there's a seething cauldron of anger and bitterness and resentment that may explode with volcano-like intensity. Have you forgiven your ex? Question 2, have you forgiven yourself?
Wait a minute. Forgiving me? I didn't do anything. She left me. I didn't walk out on her. I wasn't even aware anything was wrong. I met all my obligations. I provided for her. She's the one who turned her back and walked. If you ask me, I was a great husband.
Have you forgiven yourself? Maybe this didn't happen to you or hasn't happened to you yet, but about 4 a.m. I used to wake up and see these little video cassettes in my mind, on and on, certain little highlights. And I'd wince in pain as I saw some of the attitudes I'd held or some of the really stupid things I had said. Nothing really big or bad, I want you to understand, but just the little kind of things. You know what I'm talking about, don't you? I thought you would. Well, for a long time, those little vignettes, they would just wipe out my day, for I didn't want to admit that they had happened. But when I began asking the Lord to forgive me and to help me with those poor attitudes, those things began to disappear. Forgiving yourself is hard work, but the Lord wants to help you. But remember, be gentle with yourself. Question number 3. Has enough time elapsed for healing? Has enough time elapsed for healing? Not only does Madison Avenue sell us instant food, but also instant relationships. We want in 3 weeks of dating what we had had in 10 years of marriage. You need time to heal. And for some of you, the last thing you need is a second marriage. Hey, you're biased. And the type of person you would marry today is not the type of person you could live with tomorrow. That's why the divorce rate for second marriages is 60% and climbing. Give yourself time. Hey, you're investing in your own future. Question 4. Is there unfinished business from the previous marriage? Divorce doesn't terminate problems, but it changes relationships. She's not your mate. Now she's your ex. And if you have children, that's a viable relationship. How will a second marriage affect your children? What if your ex decides to make your life miserable? Unfinished business creates a lot of games in what otherwise should be adult relationships. And people fight over the strangest things. Why, in Nashville, Tennessee, they argued over a pickle jar full of nuts, bolts, and screws, as if it were a thing of any importance at all. And another couple was fighting it out over a moose head. He shot it and she stuffed it, and they both wanted it. Well, the judge naturally gave him custody. But when he went to claim it, she wouldn't give it to him because she said, if I take the moose head off the wall, it'll leave a spot on the wall. You've got to repaint the whole wall. He refused to do it. Well, I don't know about you, but I'd be careful provoking anyone who'd shot a moose. But little things become big monuments to wounded egos. Principle number 5, is it God's will? At this point, the theological debate really begins to heat up because there are those who would declare,
I think it's a possibility.
No, there is no remarriage.
No, absolutely not.
I don't think you can be that close-minded.
I really think it depends.
Never.
It depends.
Never.
It depends.
Never.
Depends.
Never.
Depends.
the real question as I see it is not so much what you believe about divorce and remarriage, but what do you believe about law and grace? Robert Capon said it so well. However much we fear the law, we're more afraid of grace. Now, there's no way to cover the theological aspects on a whole series of films, let alone the last few minutes of this one. But there is that verse that says, if we confess our sin, He is faithful and just to forgive us and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. And because of that, some of us who are not pure in history can be pure in heart. Yeah, I believe divorce is a sin, but I also believe judging divorced people is a sin. And contrary to popular evangelical theory, God doesn't have a hierarchy of sins, some 1 star, some 2 stars, and some 3 stars. And He has made a way. 2 Samuel 14:14 says, He has devised ways so that the banished do not remain estranged from Him forever. Have you ever tried to read the Bible through when you were a teen? Well, it wasn't too difficult the first few chapters, but you got bogged down with the so-and-so begets so-and-so. And do you ever wonder why all those begats and begots are in there? Well, listen to this. The genealogy of Jesus. A record of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, son of David, son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers. We know all that from Sunday school and small group Bible studies. So let's skip over some of that and go on to the better things. Boaz was the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth, Obed the father of Jesse, Jesse the father of King David, David the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. Wait a minute. Did you hear that? David, the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. That means Jesus' great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother had been an adulteress. That means Jesus' great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather had been an adulterer and a murderer. You've got to be kidding that this can't be right. David and Bathsheba had been involved in adultery and murder and conspiracy and cover-up, but when David created and prayed that incredible 51st Psalm, create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me, God knew how to answer a king's prayer, and He knows how to answer our prayers for forgiveness today. If God could do all of that under the law, how much more can He do under the grace of His dear Son? You see, He takes the sin as far as the east is from the west, and He takes all those broken pieces and He fits them into the windows of our lives. If anyone is in Christ Jesus, behold, they are a new creation. All things have passed away. Behold, all things have become new. Something beautiful, something good. All my confusion, He understood. All I had to offer Him was brokenness and strife, but He made something beautiful of my life. That's my friend Robert. It's been another one of those sleepless nights, the type of nights that the psalmist wrote about 3,000 years ago. You know, David had problems with insomnia too. Robert's been divorced for 3 months, and he's beginning to get used to some of what I call the realities of single adult living. Realities that you don't often hear about at certain singles conferences. Rob's learning to sleep alone, and that's a pretty painful decision. Now, some of us handle our sexual feelings and needs and anxieties great during the day. We're preoccupied with work or children or sometimes sports, but eventually around 9 or 10 o'clock at night, those feelings show up and go, "Remember me?" Well, how do single adults handle their sexuality? One way is a thing called singles bars. It's what some folks would call a meet rack. Great place to meet someone for a relationship, I suppose you would say. Singles bars all have clever names. The Happening, The Hookup, Xenon. Nice names and nice decors even, but they boil down to one thing.
Give me an S.
Give me an E.
Give me an X. What
What's
does it spell?
spell?
Problems.
Hey, baby, you live around here? What's your sign? What are you drinking? Most importantly, what are we doing in a place like this?
But there are a lot of lonely people here too, waiting to be discovered. Some of them come back night after night, somehow hoping that Prince Charming or Miss Perfect will walk through the door and whisk them away. Then, of course, a lot of single adults prefer the academic approach. They read about sex. And it's amazing how they read, almost looking for an asterisk for the sexuality of the single. For a lot of secular single adults, there are good books that you can read, such as How to Be Good in Bed, How to Pick Up Girls, and How to Make Love to a Man. Then you have the joggers and the athletes who are trying to work it out of their system. It's a process called sublimation. Sublimation. Good luck. Well, it seems to me there ought to be some principles of how we respond to this thing called sexuality. Principle number 1, single adults have a right to learn the extent of their ignorance and misinformation. Single adults have a right to learn the extent of their ignorance and misinformation. Hey, despite all the books on sex, there are still a lot of sexually ignorant people out there in single land. Myths have a way of becoming fact. And sometimes it's not what you know that hurts you, sometimes it's what you don't know. Principle number 2, single adults have a right to expect the Christian community to replace misinformation with fact. Several years ago, I was scheduled to do a singles conference in a certain state. I received a phone call from the pastor.
Brother Smith, I understand you plan to talk about a certain topic on Saturday night.
That's right, I plan to talk about...
Hope you don't have to say the word.
First time I'd ever heard sweat over the phone.
I just want to tell you, Brother Smith, you won't have to talk about that with my single adults.
Why is that?
Well, because my single adults don't have any problems in that area.
Why, are they dead?
Of course not. That's why we're having you up here.
Well, a few days later, I received a nice note in the mail with a little check saying that the conference had to be indefinitely postponed. You see, the world has no problem talking about this subject, yet some think that the church ought to be silent. But the church cannot be the church and be silent in this important area. Principle 3, single adults have a right to ask uncomfortable questions and a right to expect biblically sound responses. And single adults do have questions. We passed out some index cards before the seminar and thought maybe you'd be interested in hearing some of the questions. Why are there so many women in singles conferences and not that many men? That's not an unusual question in a lot of ways. Matter of fact, I saw a study recently that said if we all paired up the single men and single women onto the ark, there would be 8 million people left standing on the dock, all women. There were about 31.5 million single adult women and only about 22 million men. I think men look elsewhere to really respond to their needs. Studies say they look where they work, where they live, and with friends of friends. Secondly, there's a sense in which it's kind of difficult because single adult conferences and retreats and seminars really put you on the spot. You have to open up with some of your feelings, and men are not sure they want to do that. And then some men stay single much shorter periods of time, particularly the divorced or the widowed. Matter of fact, about 95% of men marry within 2 years of a divorce or widowhood. It's unfortunate. Other reasons include there are a lot of mama's boys out there, and those are the kind of men you don't want. There are men who are concentrating on their jobs, that when I make enough money and accumulate enough things, then someone will want to love me. Second question, is it God's will for believers to be sexually fulfilled? If so, what does sexual fulfillment mean for the Christian, celibate, single adult? I'm not sure that God's will is for all people to be sexually fulfilled, even within marriage. Sometimes single adults feel like we're the only celibate people in the world. But there are a lot of married people who, because of illness and all kinds of reasons like that, are not sexually active. We need to be understanding of that. But what does it mean for the Christian celibate single adult? I think the Christian celibate must realize that you're not an oddity. You know, awful lot of talk about sex, particularly in the single adult world, is science fiction. And we need to realize that not everything we hear is accurate and demonstratable in the laboratory or by gathering more data. There's a lot of people talking about sex, but really aren't seeing a lot of sex. The other thing I would add is that there's a whole row of intimacy. There are people seeing a lot of sex, but aren't seeing a great deal of intimacy. Question, how far is too far, or how much is too much? Well, I'm not sure how to answer that, because I think in some senses it has a lot to do with you and where you are on your journey, how close you want to be the Lord, how close you want to be to a person of the opposite sex. But I do know this, there's not a mathematical formula. I once did a conference where a guy got up and said there were 42 steps in sex. He went on to say that it was okay the first few dates to go up around 1, 2, or 3. Maybe 4 on the 4th or 5th date, maybe 10 by the time you've been dating a couple months. But whatever you do, don't you dare go near steps 36, 37, or 38 until you're at least engaged. And you'd have to have a calculator to figure all that kind of stuff out. I think most of us know how far is too far. And sometimes people have pushed for a level of intimacy and given in, and then discovered that they lost the very relationship they were desperate to have. Well, single adults have their questions, and some of these questions, I have to admit, put me a little bit on the spot, but I realize that behind the questions are the strugglers. Now, maybe some people, when they ask these kind of questions, are really looking for permission, but I'm convinced that most people are looking for an affirmation that they're making the right decision and saying no. They're uncomfortable questions somebody needs to answer. Principle number 4. Single adults, even when faced with impossible circumstances, can be victorious through faith in Christ Jesus. I sometimes get amused in hearing single adults share their faith, particularly when they quote Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And I and me always seem to be in neon, flashing. You see, celibacy was never designed to give pride as a byproduct. The way that verse should be quoted is, I, little I, can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Single adults can say no. A long time ago, there was a single adult who ended up in a setting that was completely unlike the one he had grown up in. In fact, his brothers had sold him as a slave, and he had been carried away into slavery in Egypt. Somehow, he ended up in Potiphar's household, an official of the Pharaoh. And the word says everything was in Joseph's care. Potiphar did not concern himself with anything except with the food that he ate. Now, Joseph wasn't ugly. Otherwise, the story would have ended up quite differently. Joseph was well built and handsome, and if you know the story, soon Mrs. Potiphar was noticing this young Jew. The King James says she eyed him continually. Today he'd be a cross between, Burt Reynolds and Tom Selleck. Can't you just hear Joseph protesting, but can I help it that I'm God's gift to women? What am I supposed to do? So Potiphar's wife was used to getting what she wanted. Yet Joseph refused. This single adult wasn't dumb. Somehow the idea has gotten around that sex must not be sought, but then it can't be turned down. One man asked, Have you ever heard of any man turning it down? Well, yeah, Joseph. Joseph finally refused to be with her. She trapped him and he went to prison. And hey, in the Hebrew, the word for prison does not mean Hilton. He languished in jail for something he did not do. But there's a phrase at the end of that scriptural passage that says, "And the Lord was with him and gave him success in everything he did." Why? Because he had honored a biblical standard of intimacy. The biblical standard says, "I will not seek nor will I accept sexual expression that is contrary to God's Word." Now, Paul continued this theme in the New Testament in writing to young Timothy, "Watch your life closely." For you see, God is not so concerned with our theologies and our doctrines as He is with our lifestyles. So let's take a look at this thing called celibacy.
Well, I certainly don't think the church would tell you what you can and can't do. Well, let's face it, the Bible was written over 2,000 years ago, and some of it just doesn't apply. Come on, the world's changed.
Well, I don't know. I think it depends upon the situation. I mean, if two people are really in love, well, I mean, we all need to be loved. And I think that if God had intended people single adults to go without sex, he wouldn't have made it such a basic drive, would he?
Oh, wait a minute. Don't try to tell me man can live without sex. I mean, if that was the case, there'd be no need for marriage. I was married for 13 years, and, well, it's hard just to shift into neutral.
The Bible says it's only for marriage.
Well, that's kind of an overview of the ideas, and of course, there are many variations. But to review, there is the permissive, which says anytime, any place, anyone, anything. The second is the selective, which says, well, it depends, the old situational ethics. And then you have the biblical standard, which says no, and sometimes no. The last statement is easily memorized, yet we need to be clear that when we say no, we say it in such a way that it does not sound like maybe or a little more persuasion, please. You see, a lot of single adults insist, I'm the only one in my whole zip code that's celibate. And some of us keep hearing tidbits from other singles and we wonder, what am I missing out on? Oh, things like herpes 2, assorted forms of venereal disease, to say nothing of a lot of guilt. But isn't it titillating to hear the latest?
You wouldn't believe the latest tidbit on Karen. I mean, I could not believe my eyes. What? Ooh, what I know is so hot you could fry an egg on it. Tell me. I better not. Would you please tell me? All right, if you insist. But if one word of this gets out, you never heard it from me. All right, all right. You promise? I promise. Okay. Well, the other night, or I should say early morning, I was driving home at 1 a.m. And guess whose car was parked in Karen's driveway? Whose? Well, go on, guess. Whose? Whose? His. No. Yes. And that's not all. Guess whose car was still parked there at 7 a.m. when I went by? No. It was just a couple of miles out of my way to go by. Honey, I cannot wait to see her face. My, my, my.
Of course, we might have asked, what were you doing out at 1 a.m.? But it's so easy to get carried away with all the details, almost like a coloring book fantasy. And then what happened? But until we know why people make the choices they make, we will never help them make better decisions. And to me, the choice to be celibate is like eating alone, sleeping alone, and being alone. So that sexuality is a network of choices, a series of yeses to escalating intimacy. So what motivates these choices? Motivation one is anesthesia.
Not exactly that I want to, but sometimes you're down and lonely, and well, it just kind of happens. Look, I was raised in the church, and I know it's not right. Like I said, it just kind of happens.
Sex is a great painkiller, but like all painkillers, it wears off. Motivation 2, ego enhancement. Sex was never designed for shoring up sagging egos.
What am I supposed to do? Can I help it if they like what they see? I mean, obviously it's what they want, and I've definitely got it. Why else would they ask me out?
In the Saturday B Westerns, it was a gunslinger coming into town, and now it seems to be sexual gunslingers who are trying to prove their macho-linity. Some single adults have been hurt, and they want someone to make them feel better about themselves. It's pulling yourself up by someone's bedpost. But a lot of talk among single adults is purely science fiction. Hurt people make odd bedfellows. Motivation 3 is, I'll show him, I'll show her. I have a friend named Bill. Bill's wife left him for a younger man several months ago, and at first he was so devastated he didn't want to date at all, but now he's out every night with a different woman, and sometimes going to the same places that he and his wife used to go. He's hoping he's going to run into her and prove something to her. Single adults play games with ex-mates or ex-fiancés or ex-dates. There are plenty of casualties in that game. Motivation 4, to cement a relationship. Remember that old line from junior high school, if you love me, you let me? Well, it's been dusted off and polished up, and today we have the feeling that sex is supposed to be an audition for marriage.
Hey, I'd never buy a car I didn't drive around the block.
And a lot of people give in under this kind of pressure, thinking some way it will bring them closer.
Well, we were drifting further and further apart. And he said he loved me, and I thought the sex thing would, bring our relationship to a more intimate level. Like cement it. Like save it.
Motivation 5, to sabotage a relationship.
Well, I knew that he really loved me, and I didn't want to hurt him, but it wasn't working for me. I wanted out. I didn't know how to tell him I didn't love him. So I slept with him. And then later said, this really isn't right. I can't handle it. We better not see each other anymore. That was my way out.
In dating relationships, sex eventually shows up. And some couples spend so much time together it's inevitable. And some get frightened by how fast the relationship is moving, so they push for sex and then use it against the partner by saying, well, I don't think we should see each other anymore since we can't control our drives. For too many, it's easier to hop into the sack than to talk. And a lot of people think sex and intimacy are synonymous, but they're not. There are a lot of people having a lot of sex who are desperately starved for intimacy. You see, it's not so much sex that I miss. But what I miss is someone being there in the middle of the night. Someone who knows my favorite flavor of ice cream. Someone who knows my name. Things that are not going to be found in a one-night stand. Things that come only in a committed, lasting relationship where we can open up. Really open up because we know we're loved. Instead, we hide ourselves and we're starved for relationships. And some settle for second best or intimacy snacks. Now, I like a big meal, but sometimes I have a little snack to tide me over. And sometimes I wonder if there ever was life before fast food. You have Winchell's for breakfast, you have McDonald's for lunch, and you have Burger King or Burger Doodle for dinner. And it's the same thing in sex. Some people are saving themselves for the big meal, the big event, but in the meantime, there's a lot of sexual snacking to tide them over. And some of those same people look down on others and say, I thank God that I don't go all the way like some single adults. Other single adults have this idea there's some mystical line, and they keep playing like sexual Russian roulette, seeing how close they can get to that line without going over. Games singles play. Now, I can't take over your life and force a system of ethics on you, but I can share some ideas with you. Mature individuals must assume responsibility for the level of sexual expression they seek, as well as the level of sexual expression they permit. Percentages do not mean right or license. It doesn't matter what everybody else in the whole world is doing. It matters what you do. And responses always have consequences. No is sometimes tough to say, but it's another way of saying yes to what is really best for yourself. Remember, you and God are always majority. Well, consider some of these questions. Question number 1, is this level of sexual expression in harmony with the Scripture? Now, some people attempt to compare Scripture to experience, but rather I think we have to compare our experiences to Scripture. Hebrews 13:4 states, marriage should be honored by all, and the marriage bed kept pure. 1 Corinthians 6:18 through 20, flee from sexual immorality. Do you not know that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have received from God? You're not your own. You were bought with a price. Therefore, honor God with your body. There is no doubt that the Word forbids sex outside of marriage. It's final. If God ever changes His mind, He'll let us know. But until that time, we live or we fall by the Word. Question number 2. Is this level of sexual expression as beneficial to my partner as to myself? Sex was designed for the mutual benefit of the husband and wife. But a lot of premarital or non-marital sex focuses on the sexual needs of the male. There are a lot of strange notions going about dire consequences that happen if you're abstinent. Well, contrary to public opinion, celibacy is seldom fatal. Question 3. Is this level of sexual expression reasonable? Even if you weren't a Christian, some things don't make sense. For example, there is no way that a one-night stand can ever meet your needs. Does it make sense? Question 4. Is this level of sexual expression the best solution? Does this level of sexual intimacy undergird or does it undermine your relationship? And a lot of people have said yes and found that it hurt and deeply wounded them. Sex can be great, but it can also be devastating and scarring. So how do we deal with our sexuality? Well, first, we have to understand that sexuality. Genesis says it all. In the beginning, God. God created everything, and He created sexuality, and He pronounced it very good. Yet some single adults have the notion that sexuality and drives and desires are bad. There are a lot of strange notions about sexuality that prevent some people from living life victoriously.
Afternoon, Mr. Thompson.
Oh, good afternoon, Bill.
Nice day, isn't it?
Oh, beautiful day.
Yeah.
Is there anything you'd like to talk about?
Yeah.
Oh, well, good. Come on in, have a seat.
Okay, thanks.
So, let's talk.
Well, the other night this girl and I were out, and, well, you know how things kind of go, and one thing led to another, and the devil was really tempting us, and, well, it happened.
It happened?
Yeah, you know it.
It?
It.
It?
It.
Oh, it happened.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Are we going to talk like this? Are we going to talk like this the rest of the time?
No, of course not.
Good.
Well, like I said, the devil was really tempting us, and I guess you could say we were swept right off our feet.
And couldn't stop.
Couldn't stop, no.
Let me see if I've got this straight. The devil was tempting you.
Oh, was he tempting?
And you were swept off your feet.
Right up and off.
And you couldn't stop.
Could not stop, no.
Okay, so the devil called up this girl and made a date.
No, I did that.
Oh, well, the devil drove over to her and picked her up at her door.
Well, of course not. I had to do that.
Oh, well, the devil drove out to this secluded place and turned off the car.
I was trying to conserve fuel.
And found some good mood music.
I like to listen to the radio.
Oh, well, then the devil began hugging and kissing her.
Hey, I just wanted to talk.
Well, after the hugging and kissing, that's when the devil began making mad, passionate love to her.
Well, no, I pretty much did that.
Well, Bill, I've got a problem. You told me the devil caused all this. It sounds to me like you did most of the work.
Well, no, that's not what I... Yeah. I guess it does kind of sound that way.
Well, we want an excuse, and the devil made me do it sounds real convenient. Too convenient. The Word says we'll never be tempted above what we can bear, but it's so convenient to blame it on the devil. God made you the way you are. Sexuality is His good gift to you, but like all good gifts, it helps if you read the instructions. You see, God could have made us like the animals to respond in seasons of heat. Oh, Sheila can't come to the singles conference. She's in heat and we've got her tied up in the backyard and she's barking. Well, you probably think that's outrageous, but if God had made us to respond in seasons of heat, there'd never be a woman crying herself to sleep at night thinking she'd been used, or a man wondering if he was as good as the last men that had been there. Yeah, God could have made us that way. But if He had made us that way, sex could not have been the beautiful, meaningful thing He wanted to be. Or God could have made us so that we wouldn't respond till we got married, till you said, I do, and suddenly your voice starts 3 octaves, little hair starts sprouting out, and you all of a sudden have these funny feelings all over. Or God could have made us non-sexual, but He didn't. And with His good gift, He has given us responsibility, the freedom to choose. So first, you have to understand your sexuality. Secondly, you have to accept it.
Brother Smith, I don't have any trouble with my sex drives.
You don't?
No, sirree.
Why?
Because I gave it back to the Lord.
Well, what's the Lord going to do with it?
Well, I never.
Sexual drives are too powerful to ignore. Now, there are some ways to deal with them, one of which is called suppression.
Excuse me, is that seat taken?
Oh, no.
Excuse me. Oh, sorry.
It's all right.
Does this bus stop at 23rd Street?
I think it does, yes. I'm not thinking about sex. I am not thinking about sex. I am not thinking about sex. I am thinking about sex.
And some good people really struggle more with their thoughts than with their actions. And the more you try not to think about it, the more you're going to think about it. Then you have sublimation. That's where you try to think about something else. I remember when I first became single again. I guess I expected an angel to come up to me while I was doing my grocery shopping.
Hello? Are you Harold Ivan Smith?
Yeah.
Oh. Rum-a-nickel, bum-a-nickel, soap, fat rag. Stub a toe, blow your nose, now you're stag. Zippity-doo, zippity-days, now you are celibate for the rest of your days.
I hasten to add that I was not zapped celibate in the grocery store. But somebody told me that maybe to handle my needs, I needed to take up jogging. So sure enough, I bought me some shoes, and every night, as soon as the late news came on, I dashed out the front door and began running, and I'd come home exhausted and fall dead asleep right across my bed for 10 minutes. And then I'd be wide awake. You ever have that kind of night, and you decide you need a drink of water, so you go get a drink of water. Then you decide that the room's too stuffy, so you open up a window. And then you decide what you need is some mood music. So you go over and stub your toe, but finally you get the radio on. You ever have one of those kind of nights? And for some reason, we're afraid to talk to Him about our needs. One of my friends came in and said, do you ever have one of those kind of nights? And I said, yeah. And he says, well, what do you do about it? And I said, well, have you ever talked to God about it? And he said, you can't talk to God about that. What would He think? And I said, John, He already knows. And he goes, oh, no. We can talk to God. He made us this way. He pronounced it good. He understands us. The third thing is you can discipline. You can discipline it. This is my pen, and I'm not really sure what it's worth at this point. But I can do anything I want to do with it. I could excavate earwax if I wanted to do, but I probably won't. Or I could use it to hold a window open. Or I could use it as a hole puncher if I wanted to do that. But if I did that, I could jar the point. Then what would happen if I wanted to write a chapter in a book or I wanted to write a love letter? It's my pen. I can do anything I want to do with. Yeah. But if I abuse my pen, when I want to use it, it was designed. It won't function that way. There was a period of my life where I weighed about 285 pounds. And if one donut tasted good, a dozen donuts really tasted good. Well, I learned that if I want to weigh 181, I have to discipline my physical appetites. It's the same way with my sexual appetites. In addition to understanding my sexuality and accepting my sexuality and disciplining my sexuality, I must confess my sexuality. You see, it's so tempting to be proud and say, I thank God that I am not as certain singles who frequent disco bars. And we get very proud about that. But some of us put ourselves in situations where temptation is overwhelming, and sometimes we don't want to say no. It seems to me it's not so much a question of if you fall, but how long are you going to lie there? Now, some single adults are insisting in this moment, oh, he lives in an ivory tower. I don't think so. I didn't say celibacy was easy or simple. In fact, it's very lonely and tough. But if I take pride in my own strength, I'm setting myself up. I must constantly remind myself that it is in His strength that I am successful. People talk about sexual needs. Well, let's talk about sexual needs. I need to know where my threshold of temptation is. I need to practice saying no. I need to avoid seeing how close I can get to that magic line. I need to admit my vulnerability. We're not called to be weirdos. We're called to be servants of the disciplined life, stewards of the good gift He has given us. We're called to be kingdom seekers. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and His